Hello and welcome. Welcome to all the teachers that are joining us tonight for this civil service webinar. And I know a few of you can't make it tonight, so you're watching it back because of parents' evenings and illnesses and everything that goes on in schools, which Lydia and I are very aware of. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with Lydia. So my name's Katie Stickley. I was a secondary school teacher for 19 years, so the same as Lydia. I think you've been in education for 19 years as well, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I set up this business, and part of that was a sort of coaching journey where I met Lydia, and I was very fortunate to be sort of having conversations with her about her next career. And then that paid back massively because Lydia got back in contact with me and said, do you know what? I'd love to share my experiences with some more teachers because I'm constantly talking to teachers about what's happening in the civil service, how to get those jobs and how to go for those slightly higher levels as well. And I bit your hand off, didn't I, Lydia? Because that is just such a nice thing. And that's the thing about teachers. We never stop. I think that goodwill and wanting to kind of help others is always going to be there. So it's absolutely wonderful to have you here tonight, Lydia, and to share your experience from teaching into the civil service. I know it's going to be really useful for people that just have that niggle at the back of their mind that maybe they want to apply for those roles. What's the reality of that? What does it look like and how do they go about it? So, yeah, tell us a little bit more about your background as well, Lydia, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm from the West Midlands, and I always wanted to be a teacher from sort of the age of sort of 11, 12. That was kind of my career. I wanted to be a primary school teacher, actually. And then my mum talked me out of it and said that I wasn't very good with children, so I should probably be a secondary school teacher instead. I don't know what that sort of means about me. So I started teaching business and computer science. And my first job was in a British Forces school in Germany, which I loved. I was there for 5 years. And I had an absolutely brilliant time. It was a lifestyle as well as teaching. And I think I had a really great introduction into sort of teaching as it was. And then I decided to move back to the UK, to the West Midlands, and taught in an inner city Birmingham school. And just really struggled, I think, because it was such a contrast to the previous school I'd been in. So at that point, it was changing from a state school to an academy, and I took the opportunity to leave teaching but not education, and I worked for Teach First, training trainee teachers, and I did that for 7 years. I was made redundant from Teach First, and so went back into teaching. And worked in a school in Worcestershire, which I really loved. And before we came on, Katie and I were talking about it and was saying it was quite prescriptive. But what I really liked about that was the fact that it gave me such structure to go back into teaching and feel sort of really safe, I think, possibly. And I really liked that job. But by the end of 5 years, I was sort of really keen to progress. I felt a bit constricted by the fact that it was so prescriptive. And so I moved and did a sideways move as head of department to another school. And I think that was partly me thinking, oh, I'll try another school to make sure that teaching definitely is for me or isn't for me. And I think after moving to my last school, I think that was kind of like the final like push I think I needed to kind of really start considering leaving. I made the decision on a whim 2 weeks before February half term in 2023 to leave, and just went and handed my notice in. And I think it was a bit of a shock to the head teacher because I think she really thought I was going to leave. I didn't think I was going to leave. And I thought if I hand my notice in, I will have plenty of time to find a job by September. Didn't quite work out that way. So I had a couple of months break between September and November. During that time, I applied for and got an interview for the role that I currently do. And also, and then because of I will go into this in a little bit more detail a bit later on, but because of the length of time it takes you to get recruited to the civil service, I got a fixed term contract working with Waterstones, which was like the best job ever, selling children's books. And it was brilliant. And it gave me confidence, I think, because after teaching, I felt a little bit bruised, maybe. I felt sort of, I think just teaching, I think it's such an emotive kind of industry that I think it's hard not to feel a little bit of grief for the thing that you wanted, or the thing that I always thought I would be, and the identity that I did have. And so I think it was good that I took a couple of months out and then got the job at Waterstones, gave me my confidence back, and then I started working for the civil service in February of this year. So I've nearly done a whole year, and that's basically where I come from. I didn't know if that was too long, Katie, because that was quite a big introduction to myself.
No, I think it's really useful, because I think people will, they'll see sort of bits that they've done, and that will resonate with them. So yeah, I think that was really useful. Yeah, thank you for that. I put in the chat, if anyone has questions, pop them in there. I'm keeping a note of them, so we can ask Lydia at the end, so they won't get lost. And just to reiterate, for some people, it will be recorded. So, if you do need to pop the kids to bed, or go answer the door to an Amazon delivery or anything like that, do not worry, it will be recorded, and it will stay live on YouTube as long as it's relevant, which hopefully will
it will be relevant.
Yeah, I don't think civil service is going to change their hiring processes that soon, so I think we'll be safe with that. Anyway, I will pop Lydia's slides on, and yeah, we can start. Thank you, Lydia.
Brilliant, no worries. I will just say that this is my experience. This isn't me advocating for the civil service. The civil service haven't sponsored this. This is very much my own opinion and of my experience as well, the experience that I've gathered from working my specific part of the Home Office. So I will just say there are variations for that. But also, I have spoken to lots of different people within different areas of the civil service, and sort of, shared my story with different people and spoke to them. So, I think that's probably the best disclaimer to give. So if we move on, I think the first thing is to think about kind of what I wanted to communicate to you by the end of this session. Once a teacher, always a teacher, obviously, you've got to start with your objectives. And I think one of the things that I was a bit naive about was what the civil service was, and how it looks. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure. Questions that I get asked quite a lot are around gradings and what that actually means. And I've tried to kind of relate it as far as I can to sort of the teaching structure, so that kind of gives you some context to be able to think about it. And also, as I go through, I'll just talk about some of the things about how I think it's the same as working in education, and how it could differ from working in education, things just to be aware of. I'll give you an understanding of the civil service general recruitment process. Different areas do have variations. So I'm speaking from the Home Office experience. Obviously, there is a standardised process to the civil service, so some parts will be quite similar, but there will still be variations. And again, I just need to make sure you've got that disclaimer. And then also, just to give you an idea of what happens when you're successful at selection, I am currently, I'm just working on my 4th recruitment as well, besides my own recruitment. So I've got a bit of experience of being on both sides of the coin, really. And so hopefully I can kind of give you some information about that too. Okay, we move on. So we're going to talk about an overview of the civil service, applying for jobs, interviews, and onboarding. And what I've tried to do is build in some time as well at the end to ask questions, at the end of each section to ask questions, so we don't gather them all up. I can see there's lots of questions already. Okay, if we move on to the next one. So firstly, just an overview of the civil service. So the ones in the boxes at the top, what you will find is if you do decide to apply and are successful, that there is lots of acronyms. So in the civil service, everything is an acronym that you have to get used to. And the ones in the boxes are the biggest parts of the civil service. So these are the parts of the civil service that, or the businesses that recruit the most people or have the most people in them. So you've got Department of Work and Pensions, which is the biggest employer in the civil service. You've got Ministry of Justice, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the Home Office, which is the part that I belong into. So a Home Office employs about 40,000 people. Department of Transport and MOD, Ministry of Defence. But there are also all of the different departments that you can see underneath it, and they will vary in size. And I think one of the first conversations I had with Katie when I thought about leaving teaching, which was in August 2022, before I actually handed my notice in, one of the things that she said to me and really stuck with me was, don't try and find a job, try and find an organisation that you really fit with and that has the same values as you and the things that are important to you. And I think for me, that's why the civil service in general has been really helpful, because I like being a public servant. That's what I liked about teaching. I liked being sort of part of society and contributing to society. So that's why the civil service was good for me. I also think that each of those different areas have got similar sort of shared values because we're all civil servants, but there are differences in the values that you might have. So in the Home Office, for example, there is a massive push on considering people at the heart of what we do, which is something that really is important to me. I always thought about the children as if it was my own children being in this classroom. Would I be happy with the service that they were getting? And that's something that I really like about the Home Office, because that's really important there as well. The reason for that is because of the scandals that have surrounded the Home Office. So most recently, the Windrush scandal is quite a big one. But it's trying to learn and lessons learned from that. And I think that's what I really enjoy about the Home Office. I think researching each part of the Home Office and finding what is special about that particular area and maybe applying to a specific part of the Home Office. For some of you that find it overwhelming looking at lots of different jobs on civil service jobs, where there's about 32,000, I think, live, actually focusing on, I want to work for Cabinet Office, or I want to work for the Treasury, or I want to work for Estin, would help you to narrow your search down. Because I think that's one thing that's really overwhelming when you look at it. There's 32,000 different jobs, but which ones of those are going to be the right ones for me? And maybe that's a good way to perhaps start your search, is thinking about the different types of businesses. They all have their own websites as well that you can look at. And they also have their own locations. So you can kind of use location as well as one way to kind of drill down into that. I think as well, speaking to some of the people that I work with someone who works for DWP, or worked with for DWP, sorry. And within the DWP, they've got quite a different culture in terms of sort of it's, I think they're quite, what's a good way to say this? I think they're sort of, their focus is very much on service and customer service. And so it's thinking about whether that's a part of the role that you'd want to go into. Whereas where I work in Home Office, I think it is very much, yes, it is about service, but it's also more about protect and crime and things like that. So just think about the values that you have, think about the things that you'd be comfortable with as well, because not everybody will enjoy working for particular things for moral reasons or ethical reasons. And so I think it's important to think about that too. So the next one. The other important thing, which I had no clue about when I went to start working in the civil service, was that there are these professions. So the civil service has I think there's about 29 different professions. Most of them are labelled here. And when you go into the civil service, you are applying to a particular profession and you belong to that. And that in itself brings lots of possibilities. So I work in learning and development, and which sits within the HR profession. And as a result, I get to access all of the HR resources, free CPD. Now, as a teacher, where you have to beg to get CPD, it's just, I'm like a sponge. I just soak it all up. And as part of that, I also am able to sign into the policy profession. I'm also a member of the finance profession. I'm a member of the operational delivery profession. I sign up to stuff and get things through the assurance and risk profession. And I just have access to lots of different things. So I think one of the things to learn from that is that you can go in one profession, but that doesn't stop you from moving to another profession if you're interested in that. And also think about your skills and think about the professions that you perhaps belong to and how that can help you with your applications and sort of narrowing your job search down. I think the two things to be aware of is project management and delivery. I think that is quite a difficult profession to get into, or a difficult role to get into within the civil service if you don't have qualifications. I think you can go in at that level sort of lower down in the gradings, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I think it's difficult to get the higher gradings, particularly if you're an assistant head, deputy head, head teacher, and those sorts of salaries, if you don't have any of the project management qualifications. And the same for finance. But the other ones, I would say, a lot of the time, I don't have any HR qualifications. I don't have any learning and development qualifications apart from my PGCE. And I found it, I haven't been at a disadvantage. In actual fact, I'd probably say I'm more qualified than the majority of people who work in learning and development, particularly around facilitation and all of those sorts of things. And that's been a massive ego boost, I should probably say, especially, again, like I said, when I came from civil service, when I came from teaching, my confidence had been knocked. And I think it's certainly given me that kind of confidence back, I think. just thinking actually you don't always need a qualification, but there are certain ones that potentially would help you, I do think. Okay, if we can move on to the next one. So role gradings. So again, lots of acronyms, but these are on the left-hand side are the gradings for civil service. So AO is at the bottom rung, admin officer. When you look at the job adverts, it will tell you what the salary bandings are. It is very rare to be able to move in the banding. So when you start in the civil service, you will be at the bottom of the band. The reason why they have bandings is because if people move around on things called expression of interest, so you do a sideways move to do a different role for 6 months, then you might move to a different part of the civil service where you're paid differently. And so the bandings just take into account the fact that you might move around. It's not for external people to be able to negotiate within that. And I think that's a common question, is around being able to negotiate. And I don't think that is something that is really, you can do that often. Certainly, I think there are some people that do it. And I think, again, there are some areas of the civil service that are more open to that. But my general experience and the experience of people I've talked to outside of other parts of the civil service have said actually kind of you have to stick within your band. So admin officer is sort of your base level. Then you've got executive officer. Executive officer is sort of the first grade at which you would line manage people. And I've tried to put their equivalencies in the teaching kind of sphere. Again, it only roughly translates, but sort of as an admin officer, I'd say it's like similar to a teaching assistant. So you're very much sort of, there are policies and procedures in place. You're very much kind of just following a policy and procedure. It's quite prescriptive potentially. There isn't much room for you to make your own decisions. A lot of the roles that are casework are based on a sort of AO grade, and casework can, like most of the civil service professions have got caseworkers, but DWP, Home Office, MOJ would have caseworkers, and they are sort of following a process. And so I think that's kind of that, you know, if you want to go in at AO grade, I think you just need to consider, would you be happy being sort of monitored quite closely and it being quite prescriptive? That was one thing that I would really struggle with. So as a teacher, I was used, and as head of department, I was used to kind of making my own decisions and being quite autonomous. And so I think I would really struggle with that. So I discounted any of those levels. I discounted AO and EO grades because for me, I just felt like I'd just be unhappy doing those ones. So when I looked at my job search, again, I narrowed it and looked at HEO and SEO grades only. A HEO is a higher executive officer, and a higher executive officer, again, would line manage people majority of the time. They would have control or autonomy over pieces of work. So the HEO in my team, he's currently working on developing a project plan for working with our SPOC network, so a single point of contact network that we have for L&D across my area, and he owns that work. So he's quite autonomous in how he wants to deliver that and what he wants to do, as long as there's a plan in place, and we will check in about it. But that's his ownership. He has that. The grade that I am at SEO, I have oversight of all of the projects. So all of the people and all the people underneath me in the projects that they manage. So I manage a bigger area. So more, I suppose, like a head of department, or because what I deliver L&D for sort of 500 people, it's quite a big responsibility. And again, I'm quite autonomous in the way that I work. And that's just something to consider. Grade 7 is sort of the next level up, which I would say is perhaps the start of senior leadership. And at grade 7 level, you'd have ownership of a wider area. You'd have several people under you who line manage several people. So you could end up line managing, as a grade 7, you could end up line managing indirectly 20 people in your area, whereas as an SEO, you'd have 6, 7, 8. Obviously, that's very dependent on the type of area that you're in. It can change. That's not kind of a once, that's not that's not the same for everybody. But on the whole, like grade 7, you'd have multiple different people, multiple different requirements that you're looking at, and you'd be expected to have more of a strategic role. Thinking about it. Grade 6, again, is more like a deputy head. You have oversight of a whole command. And those grades at grade 6, I think, this is my opinion, that it is quite difficult to get in at that grade. Just because the requirement for the knowledge of how things work and what you'll be doing. I think it's easier to get into those grades if you're working in a profession like project management, or if you're working in procurement, for example, and you've got that qualification, you've got some experience behind you. I think you'd find it easier to get into grade 6. But I think just the requirements and the interview process, I think weeds out people quite a lot in grade 6 area. And then you have senior civil service, which is pay band 1, pay band 2. And again, they'd be in charge of directorates and things like that, which I think is probably somewhere to work up to potentially. Again, if you've got a particular skill set, then I think that's easier. Like if, for example, I think HMI inspectors, they are grade 6s. I think they're graded at grade 6. But obviously, the experience that you bring to that role, the information that you have, is perhaps kind of different to what you might have as a classroom teacher. But kind of really think about that before you go into it. Next one. So where to search for civil service jobs. So you go on to civil service jobs, as it said. I think what is really important here is search terms, and think about the search terms that are really aligned to what you want to do. Before I sort of started looking, I did a massive mind map of all the things I liked about teaching, all the things that I did in teaching, and I pulled out sort of the things that interested me. So as a teacher, you are a project manager. Like every time you are planning your scheme of learning, you are managing the project. You just don't realize that you are. So if that's something that's interesting to you, then maybe that's the way to go, and that will be your search term, project management. If you're interested in sort of safeguarding, there are safeguarding roles within the civil service, and that might be something that you think about. But for me, learning and development is something that's really important to me, and that was my search term that I used. And then I filtered down for locations. I filtered down for the departments I wanted to work in. I knew I didn't want to work in the Department for Education, which might sound strange for somebody who'd spent such a long time in education, but I wanted to get away from education for me. And I, again, have spoken to people who work for DfE, and I think they've got, because it's a lot of ex-teachers, I think like it's got quite a teachery culture, and I wanted to get away with that. And then also filter for job grade, and that will break it down. So if I was to search now for learning jobs at grade 7, which is my grade above my next grade, if I was looking for promotion, that would narrow it down for me to around 30 jobs. And in comparison to the 32,000 jobs, that's a lot more manageable to look at. So I think it's so important to think about the search terms and the things that you're looking for. And I'm really happy for Katie, if people have got questions about that and like specific content, feel free to collect them and pass them on to me, and I can kind of help as much as I can with that. But I think what you need to really do with civil service jobs is narrow it down as much as you possibly can, and try and focus on different, try and focus on what it is that you like, what it is that you want, and then focus on the department and then locations and things like that. I think it's important to say there as well about the locations. I think people also think that it's a movable feast. So you can apply for a job and then just kind of wing it, and they'll kind of move around for you. That's not the case. A lot of the time it's based on desks. So we have to be in the office 60% of the time. Obviously, desk allocations, they don't over allocate, so they don't have bigger spaces and just desks lying around. So a lot of the time, if the jobs, so like jobs in the Home Office at the moment in my area, we're recruiting to Birkenhead, Stoke-on-Trent, and Bedfont Lakes, which is down in London near Heathrow Airport. And if you come and say, "Oh, can I work in Manchester?" the answer will be no, and you'd lose your offer. It's that kind of cutthroat. So I think that's something to be aware of as well, is that you can't just, if the job adverts, the majority of the time, if the job advert says it's located in these areas, then it is located in these areas, and there's not much movement from that. And I think they've really tightened up on that since I've been in the civil service over the last year. They've really tightened up with that. Next one. Any questions? I think maybe this is a good point. I can see there's quite a few questions on there. If I scroll through and have a look at what the different questions are.
There's some that you've answered already, I think, within the presentation, but there were some good questions to sort of think about. One person was asking about the sort of flexibility with people with disabilities. Now, I imagine the civil services is really good at that. What's been your experience of that, would you say, Lydia?
Legally, you can't discriminate against anybody as a result of their disability, and that is an absolute there is no recourse for any kind of discrimination if people have got a disability, simply because as an employer you have to make reasonable adjustments. There are several points, I think, at which that happens. So if you're invited to interview, well, actually, when you fill out your application, go backwards, you'll be asked to say whether you do have a disability, and you can apply under the disability scheme, which means when you apply, if you say that you have a protected characteristic, a disability, that is a protected characteristic, then you will automatically skip one stage of the recruitment process. So if the advert says that we sift on CV and then we sift on behaviour, you would skip the sift on CV and they would sift just on behaviour. Now, that doesn't mean that you automatically get an interview. It means that you sort of just move one stage ahead in the process. And it's and so like they'd still look at your CV, they just wouldn't give it a score, and then they'd automatically sift on your behaviour. Usually when they sift, or when you sift, you're looking for a score of 4 to get through to interview. So you would just they'd look at your behaviour. If your behaviour scored a 4, then you move on to interview. You'd still have to go through the rest of the process. It just means it moves you forward one step. The second thing is at that stage, if you were successful at interview, you'd be asked if you need any reasonable adjustments. You don't have to provide proof that you need a reasonable adjustment. So in the most recent campaign that I did, people said I need the question kind of put into the chat, because most of the time they're virtual now, and that was fine. And you can't question as an interview. You can't say, well, why do you need that? And you can't judge whether you think they deserve it or not. It's not about that. It's you've got to be accommodating. So you don't have to provide any kind of reasoning for it. Also, sometimes you can ask for the questions in advance. And again, if you say that you need that, if you need extra time, any of those sorts of things, you can ask for those at any point. Similarly, I think if you're an interviewer, it's, I don't think it gives a very good impression if somebody asks for something and then you're turning around and saying, oh, why do you need that? I don't think that's particularly good. Then at interview, before you start your interview, you'll be asked again then, if the interviewer is following the policy, then you'll be asked, do you need any reasonable adjustments? Is there anything that's changed for you? Is there anything we can do? And do feel confident at that stage to kind of say, actually, can you give me this? And we will make the adjustments as much as we possibly can, obviously based on what we can actually achieve in that particular time. So again, it is usually things like, can you put the question in the chat? Can you give me some extra time? And they will give you extra time and those sorts of things. If you are successful, they will ask you about your occupational health, and you have to do an occupational health questionnaire. If you annotate on that you have a disability or you need extra support, again, you don't have to have paperwork for it. Then they will you'll speak to an occupational health person. They'll do workplace assessments. In my area, they will make sure that you have kind of the proper work equipment. I think my area is quite good at that. So within the Home Office, I think we are generally good at making sure people have got bigger screens, that they've got the right work chairs, that you've got all the equipment at home. And my manager was particularly good about kind of organising anything like that. What I will say is, if you need like a particular ergonomic chair, they are ordered and they're custom sort of. What they do is they visit the workplace and then they sort of custom fit the chair, if that makes sense. It's not a custom made chair, but they kind of adjust it to whatever needs you have, and they will come and do the assessment with you at work. So that won't necessarily be in place as soon as you start on your first day. That might take some time. Usually within the first week they will do that, but there should be an interim reasonable adjustment that can help. So before you start, maybe think about some of the things that you feel that you need, that you can kind of ask for. I think my experience with that is that sometimes managers don't always know what people can have. So the more vocal you can be about what it is you need, I think that is more helpful to people. But certainly they will accommodate any way that they possibly can. And like I said, it is illegal to discriminate against you, and it's not anything I've come across in terms of the discrimination. I certainly don't think that is sort of, an issue across people that I've come across. Yeah.
Excellent. Some of the questions that people are asking, you're going to cover in the next part of your session, aren't you, about the actual, breaking down that application process. So we will definitely get to those. So please don't worry about that. A couple of people asking things about flexibility or being able to move between different departments within the civil service. Could you touch on those quickly?
Yeah, so flexibility as in flexibility within your work schedule, or flexibility like in what context?
Yeah, good question. I read it as sort of flexibility within the day. So are you able to sort of work particular hours? If you want to drop the kids off at school, can you start a bit later?
Yeah, again, I in my area, yes, I do. My cat's going to walk on the screen. Sorry. Cece. Yes, I do. I have quite a lot of autonomy. I'm able to work my flexibly around my area. Again, if you're going at lower grades, there is less scope for that. Mm-hmm. So if you go in at AO, EO grade, because of the fact that it is quite prescriptive in what you have to do, there's usually quite tight targets for what you have to turn around in terms of like dealing with casework. I think there is less scope for that. That said, you still work across the civil service 60% in the office, and then 40% at home. And so I think line managers, it's quite down to line manager discretion. My experience has been that people have been quite accommodating. In terms of moving around in departments, I think that's quite easy to do. I think that people, so a lot of the people that I work with in my team now, they've worked in 3 or 4 different departments. So I don't think people stay in one particular department. I think that's kind of a positive about the civil service, is the fact that you can move around. Again, similarly, I think once you're into the civil service, what it gives you is a greater understanding of what it's like. I don't think it helps you from people, you don't get offered jobs just because you work within the civil service. You still have to go through the standardized recruitment process, but I do think it kind of gives you a better set of, or a different set of behaviours to talk about also, that helps you to move around.
Brilliant, thank you. Did you want to look at any more of the questions, or do you want to move on to the next?
I think the majority of them, there's quite a few about the reserve list, but I try and answer that when I get forward. Yeah. Okay. So job descriptions, I think this is something else that people really struggle with. I think with the job description, what you kind of have to do is kind of get your highlighters out and your annotation. And I have a tendency, sorry, I'm just trying to stop my cat. Just one second. The cat has decided that he's helping. What I did was I printed off the job descriptions and I got a highlighter and I highlighted terms that I didn't understand and I Googled them. That's the best thing that you can possibly do. So the one that I've got here that I've just taken from civil service jobs yesterday was about business continuity. And I don't think that's really a term that you come across in teaching, is what is business continuity. And basically what it is if anything was to happen, how do you make sure that the business carries on? How does the business continue, like business continuity? And I think when you think about it, actually, a lot of the terms they are what they say on the tin. It's just a fancy way of saying them. So I think that's one thing to just be aware of, is take your job descriptions and highlight the bits that you think. If you've narrowed it down already to a particular area, so if I Google learning, there'll be jobs that come up that are called capability. And that doesn't exactly mean, that isn't the term learning, but but capability is L&D in civil service terms. And I think you just come across it, and the more you read the job descriptions, the more you kind of learn about them. Now, job description will have a bit of blurb about the actual department at the top. It will also have the locations, and it will tell you whether it's part-time, full-time, all of those sorts of things. Usually, I think there's quite a lot of scope in terms of the flexibility of like part-time, full-time working. If there isn't, it will be really clear at the top that this has to be a full-time working job. If it's part-time, then there'll usually be a minimum requirement. So it will say something like, this job can be done part-time as a minimum of 16 hours. And it will tell you what the actual requirement is. And I think one of the other things that I perhaps should have mentioned about the flexibility, compressed hours, in my area in particular, there are so many people that work compressed hours. So they work 4 days and then have 1 day off. And you just submit a flexible working request. And I think they're quite common within the civil service, that people work a variety of different working patterns. And so again, if you wanted to work compressed hours or less hours, then a lot of the times people are quite open to that. Then the next part of the job will tell you kind of what is actually about the job, so what the job is doing, and that's the bit where you might need your highlighters, you might need to Google a few words. And then there'll be a person specification and the essential requirements. And the majority of applications at SIFT stage are asking you for a personal statement, and then they might ask you for a CV, and they might ask you for a behaviour. So it will say we'll sift on the lead behaviour, and the lead behaviour might be working together, or it might be developing yourself and others, which is kind of a main one for learning and development. And the types of jobs that you're looking for, they usually have very similar behaviours that they're looking for in them. But when you do your personal statement, you are doing your personal statement against the person specification and the essential requirements. The best piece of advice I can give you is replicate the language that is used and use the order that it goes in the advert. Because I've sifted with people and I really had to argue the case for some people who have gone out of order and they've said, well, the structure's not very good. I don't think they should go forward to the next part of the process. And I think, although it's a standardized process and it should be everybody works the same, there are nuances where people mark, and it does annoy some people when they're sifting the fact that, you don't follow the process. So I think the more obvious you can make things by using the language that is in the advert and following that order, the more likely it is you're going to be able to meet that bar of a 4 with the requirements. I think, again, a massive difference between teaching applications and civil service ones is in teaching applications, you get 2 sides to be able to write all about the lovely things that you've done in the classroom, and you use lots of flowery language, and you're like, I'm excellent at planning my time because I can do X, Y, and Z. In the civil service, they don't want that. They want you to say, I am able to take training because I can do X, and this is my example. So it would just be for that top one where it says experience in business continuity or are prepared to undertake training and the qualifications in it, then you just say, my experience in business continuity is this is my example, and it would be 2 sentences to fulfill that requirement. I think one of when I recruited for the HO in my team, I could tell all the teachers' applications that came through, because they were all, I think when you're looking at it, you're thinking to yourself, I can tell that you can do it, but I don't really know because you've not given me a concrete example. And after every sentence, don't bother with the I am good at business continuity. Just go with the I have done business continuity. This is my example. And just think to yourself, if you don't have an example in there, then that's not probably going to meet the mark, because you have to demonstrate the evidence. And it's very much about the evidence that you provide in your application. Try and be straight to the point. A lot of the time, the personal statements as well will be either 500 words, 750 words. Stick to that. You won't be able to go over it in the application size that you have. I think that's kind of important to think about. So my top tips for job descriptions: get your highlighters out, highlight any words you don't understand, just Google them. Make sure you use the personal statement. Personal statement should be person specification, essential requirements, straight to the point. If you think you're waffling, take it out, get somebody to read it, cut it out, cut it down as much as you possibly can, just keeping to the examples. And after every single thing that you say, put an example to it. Don't just say, I'm a really good communicator. Give me an example. So I have demonstrated my communication skills by doing X. That's all you need to put. You don't need to say, I'm a really good communicator. You need to cut out all of the bits that you put in that you'd make a 2-side teaching application from. I don't think there's anything I can add to that one at the moment, but maybe some of the questions might come out. But yeah, if we move on to the next one. So this is an example of one of my personal statements. So this was just 1 paragraph. So my personal statement was 500 words, and I got a 5 for this. So it met above the threshold. And this was for 1 bullet point, which was around being able to manage multiple projects. And so there you can see I literally used the words that were actually in the advert. So project management skills, different methodologies, multiple fast-paced projects, which as a teacher, you will do that. So don't use teaching terminology. Think I already do that, and just say multiple fast-paced projects. If that's what's in the advert, just write that, because that is something that you're already going to do. You're not lying. You're just using the terminology that they understand, because the person who's written the advert, that's the sort of language that they understand. So replicate that. Use bullet points as well. Don't be afraid to use bullet points to make it really succinct. And again, like in my bullet points, I've just got my examples of everything that I've done. So those are the different things that I've done in my examples. So again, when you're creating them, just think to yourself, is there an example in here? Can I really see the tangible thing that I've done as a result? It doesn't have to have the result at part of it. So don't get confused with star. You don't need to do star in personal statements. You don't need to say, and as a result, this thing happened. You just need to be able to show the actual examples that you've got, and that would probably be enough, I would say, to get you through to the interview stage. At the interview stage is when you'd focus on star. Okay, next one. So success profiles, you can Google it. There is lots of stuff online. One of the people that I found really useful, and he does free resources, was Lydia Williams. And I watched all of his videos about the behaviours that were outlined in my application, so in the adverts that I was looking at. And yeah, they're all free. The other thing that he does is he offers, you can buy a question grid of questions that he's compiled, and I found that really useful for practicing as well. So usually it will be a CV, personal statement, behavior, combination of one of those three things for your application. And then for interview, you'll be tested on behaviors and strengths the majority of the time. And behaviors are told to you in the advert, so don't ignore that. Look them all up. I will talk about them a bit more in a minute, but they've got paragraphs which kind of outline the definition of what the behavior is. And strengths you don't get given, but the strengths are all linked to behaviors. So under the behavior of developing self and others, you'd have things like creative, and then there is a definition for that in the success profiles document that you can get on the civil service website. This isn't hidden, you can just Google it. And strengths are really they're 2-minute questions. It would be something like, tell me a time you've solved a problem, and you can't prepare for them, but it's about how you answer it. They're not looking for a star structure in those answers. What they're looking for is for you to demonstrate confidence, for you to be able to talk fluently, for you to be able to kind of communicate your passion. Those are the sorts of things that they're looking at. So try and think of some examples. So I'd look up the behavior, then I'd look at the linked strengths to it. I'd look at the definitions for the strengths, and then I'd think about an example that would fit those particular strengths. So in an interview that I had recently, when I was interviewing somebody, one of the things that he talked about was the fact that he is an amateur dramatic society person. And he talked about his role as a character in the play. And it was completely out of left field. It wasn't anything related to the job that he was planning to do. But the way that he spoke about why he enjoyed it, what he found useful about it, why it made him feel positive, kind of really won us over, and it got a really strong score. Because again, it's about the way that you communicate. If you're picking examples about something that you're not really passionate about, that really comes over, and that's the difference between strengths and behaviors. Behaviors you can plan for an interview, and you follow the star structure. Strengths, you don't need the star structure. It's about the way that you communicate. And with strengths in an interview, they will usually give you an icebreaker first beforehand to kind of gauge what your natural sort of disposition is. So a question might be something like, what's your favourite film? Or it might be, what's a good book that you've read? What do you like to do at the weekend? And I think that can be a bit weird as well. But what they're looking for when they ask you that question is how your body language, like how open you are. Like you can see now I'm using my hands. If I was using my hands when I was answering those strengths questions, I'd feel like, oh, this person's getting really riled up. They're obviously really passionate about it. And that would be a positive indicator for me. And that's the difference between strengths and behaviours. Next one. So this is an example of behavior definition. So you can get these from the success profiles. What I do is sort of again, this is a paragraph. I would annotate this. And again, I would replicate the language that is used here in my example behavior as I wrote it. So read the success profile definition and the job description, see where they match, and think about how you can match your example to those two things. This one's working together, and the reason why I've chosen working together is because it's really easy. Most of us work with somebody, and it's quite an easy one to be able to show your examples for. But you think about what each of the different sentences is, shows what the important parts are. So joined up teamwork, I definitely mentioned that in my example about being professional, stakeholders, collaboration, and how can you join those together. If you go on to the next slide, I think one thing I found really useful, so we can go on to the next one, Katie, is to break it down. So that is the same paragraph, but just broken down into columns. Oh, go back. It's all right. That's the same paragraph, but it's broken down into columns. So when I picked my behavior, I picked something that showed collaboration, it showed where I was being constructive, and it showed where I was being supportive, because ultimately those are the things that I'm trying to show. And I think when you look at your example and you break it, when you look at the paragraph, and you break it down like that, it's a lot easier to see what you're actually trying to aim for and what you're trying to talk about. And that's kind of one thing that I did for success profiles. On to the next slide. Pick one example for a behavior, so only do one example per behavior. I've seen it in applications where people have tried to shoehorn multiple examples into one, and again, it just dilutes it and it doesn't make it feel like you're kind of giving it your full attention. Try and choose something that's particularly challenging or not the norm for your role, and particularly if you're looking for the higher grades. So I'm a team leader for an exam board. That would be something that's quite different to other people and what people don't necessarily have. I'm also chair of the HSA PTA at my children's school, so I'd use those sorts of examples. Try to give a variety of examples. It doesn't have to directly relate to the role. So again, in a campaign that I did a couple of months ago, people were using examples from National Security Agency, which weren't related to what we were doing. They were talking about people getting apprehending criminals abroad, which is nothing to do with the role that they were looking for, but it was a relevant one. So don't necessarily think that you have to have a specific one about it. I think as teachers, try and avoid talking about pupils and students. Maybe just talk about, I try and avoid I try and avoid pupils, really. I talk about people and developing people rather than talk about developing students, and try and make it more generic, I think, in those examples. But again, think about something that shows your success. If you can pick an example which shows your success, but you've had to overcome adversity as well. So if there was a problem and you build that into your answer and you had to overcome it, that's something that people really like to see in their examples as well. So an example that you could, if you're a mental first aider, you might not have those in school really, but if you are like safeguarding lead, if you do a particular trip somewhere, a residential, teachers do loads of extra stuff. So don't always think it has to be about the bread and butter of teaching. It can be any one of different things that you do. Things like improving wellbeing, establishing ways of working, that's kind of a good thing as well. That's kind of like a civil service one in the box underneath. But if we move on to the next one. Sorry, that's somebody, dog, coming home. So STAR method. So strengths don't have to have STAR method. Personal statements, you don't really have to use STAR method. You do have to use STAR method for behaviours. So STAR method, situation, task, action, results. I know that Katie, you and Milo add an extra step, don't you, in yours? I would say just for civil service, try not to do that, just because they are quite prescriptive about the way that they do them. And it's just a general guide with your STAR. So 20% should be your situation, so a brief description of what's happening, and then the tasks, so the things that you actually did, your actual actions, and then what the outcome was. Now, recently I read an application about, I'm just going to put myself on mute 1 second while my kids come home.
No problem at all. popped in because people were asking about examples. We know that teachers don't have a lot of time for hobbies and interests, so that can be hard. If you work part-time, it's easier, but it might be something, an example at school, like a collapsed curriculum day, or a charity event that the school have done, or a sports day, or something that you've had a part in there. So I do understand that it is hard to think of being creative outside of school when you work full-time in a school, but there should have been moments throughout your career where the whole school were doing something, or you might have decided, we're going to raise money for a particular charity, we're going to do a fashion show with a feeder school, or something along those lines. So there might be those kind of moments, or just simply an assembly or a staff training that you've run. So do think creatively about it, not just thinking, well, it has to be something I've done in the evening.
I would agree with that. In my examples, I used applying for funding for a STEM project. So that was one I talked about, which was through the STEM organisation, and it was applying for funding, which was quite interesting. But again, something I did within my role. It wasn't an extra to my role. I also talked about, I talk about exam marking. So a lot of us will do exam marking. I talked about exam marking in one of my examples. Another example I would use would be running staff training, CPD, being a mentor to an NQT or an ECT nowadays. Sorry. Those are all great examples. I used an example as well in my interview of taking my year 10s on a trip to a farm as well. Again, that wasn't extra things that I did outside of my teaching role. There were things that I did within my teaching role, and just things like that. I think the examples, I don't think it's necessarily about the example that you use, it's the language that you use to explain it. So if you get bogged down in sort of like teachery, basically, I think what you could do really is, my husband's a civil engineer, he's not a teacher, and I get him to read my applications, and if he can understand it as somebody outside of education, then I think you're probably along the right lines. And just think to yourself, obviously you can use words like Ofsted and GCSE, people understand those, but if you're going to use more specific terms, like I read an application once where it kept talking about SEND, and if you're not a teacher, then you don't know what SEND is. So I was sifting with somebody and they were like, what's SEND? And I was like, oh, special educational need. And they were like, oh, okay. But and then you'd lost the person, whoever it was who'd done the application, they'd lost the person quite quickly because they didn't want to kind of trawl through it thinking, what is SEND? And another person, again, people write about oracy and about oracy. And that's not a term that we talk about in outside, we don't talk about oracy in the civil service. And so everybody's like, what's oracy? I don't even know if it's a real thing, but so try, rather than talk about oracy, talk about listening skills, talk about communication skills, because that's what oracy is. It's communication skills. And that, again, automatically puts it into terminology that somebody working in the civil service will understand. I think you can get on the internet if you Google it. I think there are some people who might have created kind of lexicons, is that probably the right word, where you look at teaching language and put it into sort of normal person language. But that's something to think about. But certainly with STAR, if you play the page, I think this is a STAR method example. So on there, so what I've done is highlighted where it's STAR. So red is the S, T is the task, A is the action, and the R is the result bit. So you can see the majority of that behaviour is around the A and the actions, and that's what people really want to know. And even if your result was that everything failed and it was a disaster, that doesn't matter as long as you've kind of accurately explained what you actually did. Now with this one, you can see it's about, this is a civil service example. So this is a civil servant, current existing civil servant who's written this one. But, they could have cut this down a little bit more. So rather than putting it at the X, Y, and Z unit, you don't need to do that. All you need to know is task to design a public education campaign. If you're going to use acronyms, then just put them in brackets afterwards. I think that's always good practice. And the fact that was good about here, so where it says, I asked to review all the data on fit notes as unnecessary notes were issued in customer views. However, the data wasn't available. So they've built in that this was a problem and I overcame it by doing this. So it doesn't always have to be a massively positive example. You can show that you're able to, that is a more valuable skill, I think, to be able to show that things can go wrong, because most of the time things do go wrong. And how do you plan for that? And as a teacher, you are making those sorts of decisions every single minute of the day. You're saying things are going wrong. You're constantly changing things. You're constantly recalculating. Oh, I've only got this much time left. This took longer than I thought it did. They didn't understand this. I'm doing this. Those are the sorts of ways that you can show that you're able to change your approach. So you could talk about, for example, another example I talked about in my applications was the fact that I took over. I started a new role. I took over the department. Nobody had done any coursework in their GCSE, and they had a piece of coursework to do. So I had to change kind of my structure of my schemes of work to make sure that I fit in all of the coursework, and kind of help them to get a good grade in that. So that was one example where I showed that because of this thing had happened, it wasn't all going very well. I had to do X, Y, and Z. I had to change my approach. And those are good examples to use. And I think those are the ones that are really valuable when you talk about the civil service. I think similarly in interviews, I've come across people who've been like, and everything was fine. And it was like, well, no, it's not. Like the example you've just give was that you were doing this and this happened and this terrible thing happened and this terrible thing. And then at the end they go, and it was all good. And it's like, well, no, it wasn't. So just be honest. Don't try and fluff it. Just say, and actually what I realized was that if I was going to do this again, this is what I would do. And that is a great thing to do. If you know, at the end of your answer, you say, actually, I learned from this and this is what I would do differently. That is another great thing. So if you've got examples like that in your written applications or in your interview applications, where you can say, these things happened, these were the actions, I tried really hard, it didn't work out, this is what I do differently. Again, I think that's going to be a really valuable answer. And I think also makes you stand out from the crowd, because not everybody has the confidence to say, it didn't work out, but this is what I'd do again if I was going to do it again. So we can move on to the next one. So interviews, I've already said this one, but sort of usually made up of behaviour questions and strength questions. If you're lucky, they will do the behaviour questions first and then do the strength questions after. Usually because I always do it this way, because the behaviour questions you've planned for properly, and you feel a bit warmed up. And then when you get to the strength questions, you already feel a bit more confident, I think. But I do know people who do it the other way around, where you go straight into strength questions cold. So just be prepared for that. For my behaviours, what I did was I looked at the behaviour descriptions, and I picked 4, rather than picking an example for each behaviour, like an example of something I'd done for each behaviour. I picked 4 things that I'd done that would fit 4 behaviours, so that when they asked me the question, I could adapt and I could pluck any one of those examples and adapt it to fit that particular behaviour. I had post-it notes all the way around my screen with my examples on and my key points I wanted to sort of get out there, and this is something you definitely have to say. I think what you'll find is, in comparison to a teaching interview, a civil service interview is a piece of cake. Because teaching interviews, if you think about it, the last one I went on for a teaching interview for a head of sixth form role, I had to do an in-tray exercise. I had to do a data exercise. I had to be interviewed by a student panel. I then had the ordering interview. I had to do a presentation. My gosh, like by the end of that, you're really wrung out. Whereas usually in a civil service interview, it's not going to last more than an hour. It will probably be 4 behaviours and 3 strengths. And that's it. And hopefully if the interviewer is any good, because this is also about you interviewing them, don't forget that they're interviewing you, but you're saying, do I want to work for this person? It should be a conversation. It should be positive. They should be helping you as much as they possibly can. And for me, if I was to go for a job within the civil service, which I very much enjoy working for the civil service, but I didn't have those things in my interview, I'd walk away and I'd say, sorry, you're not the right people for me. So don't be afraid to kind of turn down an opportunity, because I suppose we call them red flags, aren't they? Because if somebody's making it really difficult for you, then they're probably not going to be a great person to work for. And I was really lucky. My interview was like a conversation with somebody. My boss, Lisa, she was lovely. She wanted to know all about me. And it was nice. And she has been a very nice line manager. So that's a real positive. Behaviours are published on the job descriptions. Please don't ignore them. Do as much prep as you possibly can. I watched maybe 12 hours worth of YouTube videos on the behaviours and did enough research. And like I said, I had all my post-it notes around my screen. I picked my 4 examples that I was going to use that I thought I could shoehorn nicely into my examples, into my behaviours. And I did it that way around. That doesn't suit everybody. But that's just the way it works for me. The strengths are not communicated on the advert, but they will be indicated based on the behaviours. So you can see there in the box, I've put the working together one. So working together, the strengths that you might be asked on will be things like challenger, emotionally intelligent, inclusive negotiator. So a question you'd be asked by that would be, tell me about a time where you've had to influence somebody. And they'd be those sorts of questions, and you'd just be asked to answer in 2 minutes. They do give you, for strengths questions, they do give you a time limit, which is usually 2 minutes. And they also expect you to be able to answer within that 2 minutes. If you go over, again, that's probably a thing that's not great. They will stop you, which is a bit of a weird thing as well. When somebody's going, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to stop you now, and you're in the middle of your sentence. And again, just to reiterate, the strengths questions are about you communicating your passion, making it seem like something that you naturally do. Think about you as your best self. Like, what are the like, how do you talk when you're doing something that you're really happy with, or that's really gone well? That is what you're trying to replicate for the strengths questions. That kind of enthusiasm and positivity and sort of big personality, I suppose. Next one. Oh, do you want to do any questions first before we go to onboarding about interviews? Have I missed anything?
Yeah, we could. There was a few questions. A couple of people were asking about learning development roles. Are they just in the HR department, or are they in other departments as well?
So you don't work in HR, you work in L&D within a particular area. So I work in L&D for the Home Office, but it sits within the HR profession. So you will always sit within the HR profession. That means you can access all of the learning and development opportunities available to the HR profession. But they, so there's a learning and development department in every single part of my business. So Home Office, I work in immigration enforcement, and that has got 5 different commands. And in each of those commands, there is an L&D department that sits within them. And there's also a central Home Office L&D department that we filter into as well. So you can, there is a lot of variety, and most places will have an L&D department. So if you work as in commercial, which is like procurement, like buying stuff essentially based on contracts, then you work in a consultancy way, which is where you belong to the commercial team, but then they hire you out internally to different departments. So I sit next to somebody in my office in Solihull who works for commercial, but he's currently seconded to the fire service. So he does the contracts for the fire service, but he still is employed by the commercial department. That's a bit of a weird thing that perhaps is hard to grasp, but doesn't necessarily make much difference to your applications, and certainly won't make any difference to your employment or anything like that. It doesn't make a difference.
And a couple of people asking if the interviews are remote or online all the time, or are they ever in person?
Mostly virtual, I would say. If you go for the big recruitment campaigns like DWP, I think recently did a massive job coach one. They do a lot of you video yourself answering questions, and then they review them that way. And I think that's just because of the amount of applications that they have. In my area, a lot of the time, so for the recent campaigns that I've recruited for, there have been about 110 applications, and then we've taken 10, 12, 15 people to interview, and they've always been virtual interviews. I think very rarely you'll get one where it's face-to-face. But most of them. But I think the advantage of having a virtual interview is because you can stick all your stuff around your computer screen. And you're in your own home as well, so you can wear whatever you want on top. On your, you can wear whatever you want in your bottoms, pajama bottoms, and a nice top. That's the other thing to say as well. Like, people are really lax. Like, I've seen people interview in hoodies and stuff like that. You wouldn't do that in teaching. But yeah, so don't worry so much about your appearance. That's not necessarily something that people kind of consider.
So just to sort of clarify, is the STAR method useful for the application, or is it only really useful for answering the behaviour questions?
So it's useful for application when you're writing about a behaviour.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're writing a personal statement, you don't really need to use STAR. What you need to do is say, I can do this. This is my example. If you
Excellent.
could put a bit
Okay.
in there that says, I can do this, this is my example, this is what I achieved, then that would be a great thing. But usually, because of the word limit, you won't necessarily have time to be able to do that. Again, it's about the actions, it's about the things that you do, it's about the actual tangible examples. And the more you can make it tangible for people, the better it is. Just try and avoid saying I'm a good communicator, because I am. And you'd be surprised the amount of applications that you get that are like that, that just say, I'm really good at communicating, full stop. And you're like, but how, why, how do I know that? Just because you say you are?
Yeah. Someone else was asking, which I did think was quite interesting, you know, as it's a big thing at the moment, but is it useful to use AI to help write those applications? No. Okay.
No. If, like, this is a really hot thing as well, if they think that you are writing using AI, then they will withdraw your application. We've been given
Good to
quite
know.
firm guidance on that. I know there are places that are really embracing it, aren't they, allowing you to do it. I do think that you can use it as a basis for your answer, but I would rewrite completely. I think sometimes unfairly people are accused of using AI. In actual fact, it's just because they write really well, and I think that that's kind of a problem as well. But I think on the whole, avoid it. Yeah, for civil service, avoid it.
Good to know. And Laura's asking here about times of interviews. Are they flexible so you can schedule them in after you finish your teaching for the day?
Yes, yeah, they definitely are. Again, I think that's dependent on the actual manager themselves. I mean, most of the time we have a tendency to work between 9 and 4. When I've done campaigns where I've chosen the dates, I've purposely put later times in for people, because I'm aware of the fact that, you know, it's hard and you don't always want to tell your school that you're applying for stuff as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think on the whole, people will be. I think the other thing is as well, I don't know how much flexibility there is if you can't make an interview, because of the fact that it is a standardized process. A lot of the time, those are the slots. So if your application's successful and you get to interview stage, you'll go on civil service jobs and it'll change status, and then you pick a slot. And a lot of the time, those are the slots that are available. They won't do any more than that because it's tight timelines. And so there isn't much flexibility with that, I don't think. So I think at that stage, you need to consider, do I really want this job enough to be able to go and speak to my school and say that I need time off? But it would also only be an hour most of the time, so it's not going to take out a huge chunk. And I would say that people have a tendency to put them throughout the day. So they put ones at 9 o'clock, they put ones at 4 o'clock, they put ones throughout the day over a course of time. I think maybe that this isn't necessarily directly related, but I think also within the civil service, there's a lot of, when you go to apply for another job within teaching, I think you're guilt tripped a lot and you feel really bad about leaving your school or wanting to consider leaving your school. Within the service, that doesn't exist at all. Like, you don't even have to tell your line manager you're applying for another job. You just apply for it. And then if you get the job, you're like, hey, I got a job. And they're like, oh, great. When are you leaving? So it is a different culture to get used to. It's just the fact that people don't sort of sweat it. They're not pressure. You know, obviously you build working relationships with people, but they also are aware of the fact that you want to move around and you want to get different experiences. And I think that's very much welcomed within the service. That's quite positive.
And you know, top tips. A couple of people have asked about sort of nailing that interview, you know, not being able to get past that hurdle. I mean, you alluded to it before. It's about that research, isn't it? It's about really looking into those behaviors and writing something that you can prepare and practice. What would you say, Lydia, your sort of top interview tips then?
It is that, it's preparing. I don't think like I said, I watched 10 hours of YouTube videos. I rewrote my behaviors. I had them stuck around my computer. I practiced with my husband. I think you've just got to you've just got to practice it. I think for the behaviours, the difficult thing is that you can plan for them. And so sometimes it will come out as really robotic. So I'm very good at this because of this. And this is my example. And you go through the star thing. And I think you've got to balance that between coming over as a natural person and trying to sort of appear human, because I think that's what they're also looking for. I think there's more leeway with the behaviour questions. I think people would be surprised. I think most of the time people fall down on the strengths questions, to be honest. In my experience, just from interviewing people, like they give brilliant behaviour answers and you're like, oh, this is really great, and you're really excited, and then they get to the strengths and they just really flummoxed, and just it's very difficult. I would also say this is something that's come up recently. I had a campaign recently where I interviewed a few teachers, and the unprofessional language that was used was just, I was shocked. Like just talking about colleagues and just saying, oh, this person was, like a derogatory term. And I was like, I actually kind of in the feedback afterwards just said, please be aware of the way that you refer to people, and kind of the way that you speak, because even though it is a relaxed atmosphere, and I'd say it's much more relaxed than teaching, there are certain things, there are just certain boundaries you can't cross. And I think that's just one thing to be aware of, is that language. And I was really surprised. I had 3 people where I had to put that in the feedback, just saying, please be aware of the language that you use around talking about colleagues, talking about parents, that sort of thing. And I think that just showed people's inexperience, I think, with the interview process outside of teaching. So that would be one thing as well. Just think about your language, practice those strengths questions, really look at the linked behaviours with the strengths questions, and think about how you can answer those. Practice in the mirror, the same way that you would practice kind of projecting your voice. Like, how do you fake enthusiasm for something? I don't know, but just like think about how you come across. So if you kind of, when you're slouched and it doesn't kind of give a good impression, so think about how you can, for the strengths questions in particular, do that. And then also, I think maybe asking questions at the end. Recently, this was a bit of a strange one as well. I had somebody say to me, who are you looking for? And I was like, I'm looking for somebody that meets the criteria as set out in the job description. And they were like, no, really? Who are you looking for? And I was like, I'm looking for somebody who meets the criteria of the job description. They were like, no. I mean, who are you looking for? And I think they were thinking there was going to be some secret kind of code to it. And they went round and asked everybody. So have a question. Don't ask that question. Have a question. I try and avoid the questions around salary. Like I said, it's quite fixed. There's little wiggle room within that. But I think you can ask things around like the recruitment process, like how long will it take, I think is a fine one to ask. And things like that. Just be aware of like asking questions too. And I think the other thing I would just say is you are interviewing them as well. You have the power as well. It's shared 50-50. It's not a process that's being done to you. It should be something that should be 50-50. And if at any point you feel like it's a process that's done to you, don't accept the job. Another one will come along. And that's probably the better opportunity for you, and really value yourself. Don't think that you have to, just to get into the civil service, that you have to accept a role that isn't going to be quite the right one for you. Because although you can move around, I don't think it's as quick as people think it might be. Certainly not for promotion. I don't think it can be that quick. I've just recruited somebody who was an AO working for an agency, and I've recruited him as a HEO. So he's gone up AO, EO to HEO. So he's gone up 2 jumps, but it's taken him 18 months to do that. So it's not like you're going to come into a job and then within 3 months, you're going to move up to another one. So again, think about the finances around that. I suppose that said, around finances, I haven't really touched on this, but my salary that I earn now is on par with my UPS 3 with a TLR, because the pension isn't as big. And then the other thing to probably just talk about is bonuses. So we get rewards for when you do good pieces of work, and they're vouchers. So you get given vouchers, and those vouchers can be anything up to £650. And you get sort of an allowance of about £1,800 roughly a year that you can be rewarded for. And in teaching, where people don't really ever tell you that you're doing anything great, like when when you get given, like, somebody's like, oh, have £350 to spend in John Lewis, you're a bit like, whoa, what have I done? Like, I'm just doing normal things. And they're like, no, you're doing a brilliant job. And as a teacher, we do so much. Don't undervalue yourself, because I feel like sometimes I don't really do much more than I was teaching. I don't do any more than I was teaching. In actual fact, I do less sometimes. And people are like, that's amazing. And I'm like, really? Is that amazing? I'm just doing something I would have normally done as a teacher. I can remember creating a spreadsheet for my budget, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You've got a spreadsheet for your budget. And I was like, yes. And they were like, oh, this is amazing. And I was just like, I can't. Yeah, sometimes I just don't get it. But yeah, that's a positive. So just talk a little bit about onboarding, I suppose. So you have your application, everything goes through civil service jobs. I think that can be a downside because it feels a bit robotic, because you're just interacting with an online platform sort of thing. You then do pre-employment checks. Again, I work in the Home Office, which is a little bit different because of the levels of security are a bit different. But you'll have an occupational health check, then they'll do security checks. Security checks are at 3 levels. Again, depending on how much like access you have to secure information. So the first level is counter-terrorism. So everybody who works for the civil service is checked for any kind of links to terrorism or anything like that. Then the next level of check is SV, which is security vetting, which is kind of, you just have to kind of give the details of your husband or like your partner or different things like that. My mum and dad as well, I think I had to give details of. They don't do any checks really. It's just like looking into backgrounds, making sure that you've got no kind of links with organisations and things like that. And then the last level of vetting is DV. I don't actually know what it might be deeper vetting, I think. For that level, that is really rare that people have to have that. It's for people who are like extreme security, like, like very high security kind of roles. And that involves like an interview with people and stuff. That's quite a difficult one. But majority of the time it is counter-terrorism at a minimum, and then maybe SV. And those checks actually came through quite quickly. They took about a couple of weeks. If you keep on top of the paperwork as it comes through and do it as soon as it comes through, then you're going to help push the process along. So I got my job on the 29th of September. All of my checks were completed by December, but then it was Christmas, so that delayed things. You can't really start. They want you to start at the start of the month. So the start of the month would have been January the 1st, so that it was put off. So I actually started on the February the 12th, which was a bit ridiculous. So September to February. And I think that can be a positive for teachers, because obviously we're used to finishing at certain points within the year. That said, you might sort of want to take a punt like I did and hand your notice in. Again, you've got to look at your own situation. You can't, nobody can tell you what you can, how that's going to work for you. But certainly, where are we at now? We're at Christmas. I would say sort of start looking now for jobs that could potentially, you could leave at Easter maybe. You'd maybe just be able to get into Easter. You could possibly negotiate a leave at May half term. And that's the sort of timeline, particularly in the Home Office. That's the timeline. Once you've gone through all those checks, then you get a firm offer, and at that point they provide you with a contract. Again, it's your own personal decision whether you want to hand your notice in before that point or not. The contact with your line manager throughout, if they're a good line manager, then you'll have contact with them throughout the whole process. Like in teaching, you come across good managers and bad managers, and it's exactly the same in the civil service. You're going to come across people that you really like working with. You're going to come across people that you don't. And then you get your equipment. So I got my laptop. I actually got my laptop at the start of January, even though I didn't start for another 6 weeks. I also got a mobile as well. So I've got a work mobile, which is really exciting. When it rings, I'm shocked because it never rings very often. And then you get your building passes. So obviously I work in the Home Office. It's quite high security buildings, so you have to have a building pass to get in. And then you have your first day. Your line manager should meet you on your first day. And usually I think the other thing to be aware of is, people are sort of, the feedback that I've, had from most people who are teachers is that we work too fast for civil servants. Like our pace, we're so used to working at such a fast pace all the time. Most of us get through loads of work and everybody's like, slow down, like calm down. In actual fact, the HEO who I'm working with, he's an ex-teacher, and I'm having that exact same conversation with him. I'm saying to him, just slow down, like you don't have to go so fast. And yet that was me nearly a year ago. I was like trying to get everything done. But yeah, people are really kind of understanding. I think you sort of got 6 months to be able to kind of really settle in. People are very much like, oh, take your time, don't push yourselves. Like, I think it is very kind of nurturing, I suppose, in that environment. You'd be on probation for 6 months. At the end of the probation, then you're a substantive civil servant and you can move around wherever you want. You can't leave a role within the first 6 months, so you can't apply for any internal roles within the first 6 months. And you can't do EOIs or anything like that, so expressions of interest. So you can't move around for the first 6 months. You can still apply for external jobs. So any jobs that are advertised externally, you can still apply for. But when you join the civil service, you get access to like a backdoor to civil service jobs, which gives you access to internal jobs and across government jobs. So it perhaps widens your scope a little bit about where you can go. Yeah, I think that's most things really. Any other questions?
Ollie's got an interesting one there. Can you see that in the chat, Lydia?
Ollie
T.
Ollie T. Oh gosh, I haven't even been following it. Quick look on the jobs boards. It's been on the call. Stumped by essential experience job being so specific. If any workarounds there are for that. Again, I think it's I think that's very much dependent on the type of jobs that you're looking for. Like when I look at L&D ones, I think they're perhaps less specific. They'll talk about things like sort of supporting departments, particularly early careers people. I think that's more in terminology. If you're looking at quite a specific one, that's quite an interesting question. Let me come back to that one. Let me have a think. Yeah.
No worries. And there was something else I was looking at. Oh, someone was asking about the pension. You did touch on it. Obviously, it's less than you're used to paying for your teacher pension. But what's the pension like?
So it's the pension is great. I mean, in terms of what you actually get. So I pay 5.4% in comparison to I think it was 10.9-ish. Don't quote me on that if I'm wrong. I think it's 10.9. It might have reduced to 9.6 or something like that before I left, which makes a big difference in itself. And then your civil service pension, when you pay out, it is the equivalent, I think, of the civil service pays 27% on top of that. So it's 31% of your salary. It's a good pension.
It's a good pension, yeah. It's a good pension. And a couple of people did ask
that as well. Or you can transfer in your teacher pension to your civil service pension. So if you do get a job, you can transfer in your accrued whatever you've got for your teacher pension, but you need to do it within the first year. So make that your priority or one of your priorities when you first start finding out. What they'll do is they'll get a statement from teacher's pension and then a statement from what that will cost if you transfer in, and then you can make your choice and they'll tell you which one they think is the better one, whether you transfer in or not.
I know lots of teachers are really keen on project management type roles because, of course, we do a lot of project management.
Yeah.
So, qualifications that you would need for that. There's Prince 2 and there's Agile, and I've been having conversations with people recently about which ones they prefer because they're quite different, aren't they? Prince 2 is quite structured and Agile's
I'd actually advocate something like PMQ, which is the fundamentals. So the fundamentals actually gives you an overview of Prince and Agile working practices, so like the methodologies behind it. Funnily enough, this is one of the conversations I have. So I work in L&D, but I do have a lot of conversations with people about like career types conversations, like I'm a careers advisor. And project management fundamentals is kind of, it's by the Association of Project Managers, and it's a good kind of all-round qualification. The majority of the time when I look at adverts for project managers in the civil service, there will be things like you can have one of, you don't have to have them all. In my area, the project managers, so we have around 50 odd project managers, and they don't really use Agile. They use Prince majority of the time. But again, if you want to get like chartership with project management, then you have to show a range of experiences. So even if you did the qualification, if you don't have a project that you do that uses that methodology, then you wouldn't be able to really get any further with it. Again, it's what we have a tendency to do in the civil service, because I buy in the courses for people, is you only use that methodology when you have a project that needs that methodology. I think the other thing is as well, when you get into the civil service, there is so much project management support outside of being a project manager. So you don't necessarily have to be a project manager to access that kind of project management support to learn how to do it. And then you could transfer into project management based on experience only. So I think that's important. Again, like I think it's based on the experience more so than the qualification. Just from the job I've had for project management.
Eliza saying, been teaching for 20 years and struggling to find an example of STAR. And I mean, I think that it is hard for teachers. We're in quite a fast-paced environment where, you know, you have the next cohort of students or the next kind of decision from school and senior leadership and how you need to change your lessons, your schemes of learning, all this sort of stuff. But actually, there's loads that you probably have done within your 20 years. So I would suggest perhaps taking a bit of time out, Eliza, and doing like a skills audit or something like that on yourself. And I would start with something really simple about thinking about moments within your teaching career that you're really proud of, and just sort of write those down. You know, who was involved, how many people, what did you do, and you can then start to sort of almost shape it in the STAR method, because you will definitely have had things from 20 years, even if it's just writing a lesson plan or a scheme of learning, or just helping one child feel more confident. Lydia, have you got any advice for that with teachers? It's almost like a sort of what's the word where we feel like we're a bit institutionalized, aren't we?
Well, and you devalue yourself, you devalue your skills that you have, and you think that you know, because it becomes natural part of what you do. I think we think that everybody thinks the way their teacher thinks, and you don't. Like normal people, I don't say that like we're abnormal, but most people in a working environment don't go through the same level of things that you do as a day in teacher. And like, even if you just think to something as simple as like mentoring someone, it doesn't have to be an ECT. You will have mentored somebody at some point. And if you think about the behavior of developing self and others, if you can talk about the fact that I mentored somebody to achieve this, as a result, so to help them, I planned in regular meetings, I observed their practice. I gave them pointers for things that they could do. I gave them constructive feedback. We worked on a plan together. That person then went on independently to do this. And as a result, they were able to do X, Y, and Z. That is a great STAR example of something that you do. I think the other thing is look at the teacher standards. So look at the things that you're supposed to do as a teacher and use that as your starting point, because the teacher standard basically just sets out everything that you do as a teacher. And then what are those things that you can then relate to the examples, to the job descriptions that you might have? So like I said, project management, writing a scheme of work is project management, because you're delivering the project to the end. Like if you have to make a course correction because of something happening, you know, like we're around Christmas and there is always Christmas assemblies and time taken out of your time, of your curriculum time. And so therefore you have to plan around that. That is risk assessment, and it's also adapting your approach. You're working towards milestones, you're trying to achieve things at the end. So we do a lot of project management. We just don't use those terms in the way that we work. Well, I say we now, but the way that teachers work. You're constantly collaborating. So is there a time where you've had a team meeting where you've delivered something as part of that meeting, a departmental meeting, and you delivered a new initiative as part of it, or you've presented on something? Have you implemented questioning, which is checking for understanding, which is communicating? That's what I would do. I'd look at my teacher standards. I'd look at those examples that I'd have. Perhaps if you've gone for UPS as well, after 20 years, you might have a portfolio of things, and look back on those to help jog your memory, and also kind of use those as your examples. But don't devalue the things that you do. Like I said, when I created a spreadsheet, I can't communicate how shocking it was just by creating a spreadsheet that was normal to me. It was something that I'd done all the time, and everybody was like, gosh, wow, like this is amazing. And just things like that, people are like just blown away by just things that you do as a teacher. And I think you'll find that as well. Like it's been a massive confidence boost. And certainly when I talk to like people I know in civil service who are also ex-teachers, they're like, what? We just get together and we're sort of like, I can't believe they think that's amazing. Like, that's just normal. That's just a normal way that we work. So yeah, don't devalue it.
And I think as well, as teachers, like we kind of forget because it is normalized, isn't it? But we upskill all the time. So we're always thinking about, even if it's just the cohort of kids that you've got and you're thinking, right, I need to differentiate this because of, disabilities, physical disabilities, as well as like impairments. And then you're constantly working that out, aren't you, as a teacher? And if you're in primary, then you've got that class for a year. So you've got to really develop those relationships and stretch yourself like that. If you're a secondary school teacher, then each hour you're going to have a new set of kids that you have to kind of pick up and evolve with. So, basically don't beat yourself up. You do an amazing job and you should be really proud of it.
Yeah, I mean, the example, the behavior that I shared about working together, there's an explicit sentence in that, and it appears in a couple of the behaviors about inclusivity and diversity. And SEND is a prime example of inclusivity and diversity. And that is such a massive push on that across the civil service. There is also a massive push. So as part of the civil service improvements, there's a thing called One Big Thing, which is One Home Office. And this year's One Big Thing is innovation. And I don't know of anybody who is more innovative than teachers. And if you can talk about an example where you had a student who didn't understand something, and so you adapted your approach, the way that you did it, and tried something different, and you got the student to understand it, that is being innovative. And again, something that we do on, regularly, you give an example and you'll tell some, like you'll ask a question 3 different ways to get children to understand it. And you do that naturally. So yeah, that is a definite thing. I think there's one question I just did want to answer, just looking at the chat. Would L&D come under knowledge and management or information and education training? Education and training, it comes under. So search for, that's a great thing. So on civil service jobs, it says area and you can filter for area. So you can look at HR, you can look at education training, and a lot of the L&D jobs come under training. But you can also look for other areas if you're interested. And I think like that's a key thing, is just finding any ways that you can to narrow down the level of jobs that you're looking at is really important. Because I think that makes people feel so overwhelmed when they look at it. I think just narrowing it down, if you can narrow it down to maybe 30 jobs, that you can pick 1 or 2, you can do that.
And I think Pippa's saying that as well. It's overwhelming looking at any job board, isn't it? But especially the civil service, where perhaps we feel a bit more inclined to work in that kind of field because it's still public sector. Just think about what Lydia said as well about just doing a bit of a mind map about all the skills that you have in teaching, and get your highlighter out and just highlight the ones that you genuinely enjoy the most, and then just sort of think, okay, well, where am I going then? Is this more of a communication role? Is it more of an analytic role? And just trying to work it out that way, because it is quite daunting, isn't it? Narrowing things down, but staying true to yourself is going to help, I think. And therefore, when you apply for those jobs, you're genuinely passionate about that particular job or that field.
Just to go back to Ollie's question about the essential experience, I thought about it. What I would do is I'd pull out the key terms. So I'd pull out like the words like collaboration, planning, whatever those keywords are, and those are the examples that I'd use. So what they're looking for there in the essential criteria is somebody who can demonstrate those skills and behaviours, not necessarily that specific thing. So yeah, that's the way that I'd go with it. I'd look at your job application, I'd pull out the key terms, and I'd use those in my examples to navigate the essential criteria. Somebody's put in there, my GCSE science tutor, what is the highest level a head of department is likely to be able to join? I think you can apply, you can take a punt. I just think like I've gone in at SEO level, so senior executive officer, and a lot of people have sort of said, oh, you've done well to get in at SEO level. Again, that's very dependent on the area. I would just take a punt at it. And if you don't, at least hopefully you get some feedback that would help you to improve. Looking at a job advert that has no essential criteria, base the personal statement on the person specification. Yes, use the person specification and whatever elements are in the job description. Yeah, I think is that most people's questions, I think
it is. Yeah, I think a lot of it that you covered throughout, so it's worth perhaps watching back some of the webinar just to hit those
Yeah.
points.
There's one other question, which is from, I was talking to Katie about this before we started. I think that very much depends on the type of person you are. An admin role is likely to be quite prescriptive, like there's like DWP, for example, they have targets of you have to have this many phone calls or manage this many cases or speak to this many people. If you feel like you're going to struggle with that, then I would say no, hold out for a job at the right level that you want to go in at. I think it very much is personal preference. I would have really struggled to go in at AO or EO level. And so I didn't even bother applying for those. I just held out for HEO and SEO jobs, and I was really lucky to get an SEO. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's personal preference and what you can stand. I certainly know that I've come across people who've kind of gone in at AO, EO grade, been really frustrated about it, and then have gone back into teaching because they're sort of like, is this what it's like working outside? And for me, that's sort of, I think that's hard to do. I think you go back to what you know and then you become unhappy again. Whereas I loved my 19 years in education. I was sad for a while that it wasn't the right thing for me, but for me and my family now, it is the exact right choice. And my teaching skills and my teaching knowledge and experience have helped me get to the place that I'm in. It isn't something to be ashamed of or something I would hide from. I certainly think it's shaped the person that I am. It's made me more resilient. It's made me, like I said, I've developed so many skills, and I wouldn't be able to do the job that I do now without those skills. So it's kind of been a step on a journey. And I think that's what you've got to think about. I think sometimes as well, I know we're kind of running over time, but I think something that I'm really passionate about is I'm on those Facebook groups where people are talk about leaving teaching, and people are like, but I was perfect for that job and I didn't get it. Well, no, you didn't get that particular one. Don't take it personally. And I know that's really that really riles me when people say that, but it is true. I just think you've got to kind of take it on the chin and just think that wasn't the right thing for me, because that is what the job process, that's what the application process is. It's sizing you up and saying, are you going to fit? And if they're saying no, you don't fit for that particular opportunity, then that's what it is. It's not a personal slight on you. It's not saying you're not worth, you don't have value. It's just saying that this isn't the right thing for you right now, and don't let it get you down. I think I went through a bit of a dip when I was applying for jobs. I applied for about 45 different jobs in different things. Like I started off applying for things like guide dog trainer, just like, what do I want to do? And then I started applying for jobs in education. And teaching actually, and I was like, no, can't go into teaching. I did one, it was horrific. I was like the happiest person who never got a job, like skipping out of the school when I didn't get it. And then I thought, well, education, so I went for jobs in education and thought, no, that's still too much for me. And then I had a bit of a dip, and I was like, I'm never going to get another job. And this one came along, and I think you've just got to take that rough with the smooth and not take it personally, and just the resilience that you develop to have children telling you that you're rubbish at your job every day, and that your head of department sometimes can tell you that you're rubbish at your job, or parents tell you that you're rubbish at your job. The resilience that you develop through that, apply that to your job search, and just think, well, didn't work for me this time, but there's more, there's more out there, and there's other things that I can do. So don't lose faith with it.
I think that's incredible advice, isn't it? And I always think as well to not think about it as leaving teaching. It's not that you're trying to escape the classroom and trying to leave. You're going towards something else. You've already done that. You've ticked that box teaching. And I think that's amazing. Loads of people never go into the profession, but you've gone into it. And I think, if you want to move on and have a new challenge, that's really exciting. And coming from that positive mindset is going to help you way more, isn't it, Lydia? Because it's quite a big task to research these jobs and research what they're asking you to do. And so if you're not interested in it and you're being perhaps negative, that's not going to help. So staying really positive and remembering all those skills that you've built in teaching are incredibly useful outside of teaching.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think, just look at it as this is a step on my journey. I was a teacher. I think I didn't stop thinking of myself as a teacher really until maybe 6 months into my new role. And I still used to say, well, I'm a teacher, because I think it's just the whole profession. Like, it is an emotive thing. It's part of your being. It's who you are. It's your identity. And I think that's something that you have to come to terms with. And for me, that time I had off between September and November was starting at Waterstones. That was kind of like, the grief cycle. That was my grief cycle. And I needed that time. I needed that time to just kind of decompress. I was used to operate, because I think we're also used to operating with our adrenaline at such a high level as well, that I think you need time to just kind of like poof and come down. And I didn't realize that that was me. Like, I didn't realize that was what I was doing and how I was living my life. And it's all these things afterwards that you kind of look at and you think, gosh, you know, why did I do that for so many years? And like I said, I loved my teaching career. I loved working with the kids, and there are still things I would go back and do. I just wouldn't have it as a whole package. Because the package I've got now, yes, there are bad things about it, as there are in most jobs, but on the whole, what it offers me and what it offers my family is more important than anything else. Yeah. And just the confidence boost. Like I said, you'll all have a spreadsheet out there that somebody is going to say that's amazing.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Those little wins, you've got to celebrate those, haven't you?
Definitely. But yeah, I mean, like, I'm really happy if people, if like you get a certain amount of responses from people and you've got, like, you want to collate them and you want to forward them on to me, I'm really happy to kind of, or if you get more people that want, you know, other specific things, then just let me know. I will try to help as much as I possibly can. And I suppose that's one thing I would say. The reason why I offered to do this was because I wouldn't have left if it wasn't for people doing these sorts of things for me. Sorry, it'll make me cry because Katie was no, it's fine. Because Katie was one of those. You gave me half an hour, and that half an hour sort of really pushed me onto the next stage of things to do. So if you can do anything from this, then please just pay it forward to somebody else if you make it out. Sorry, I cried. Just
no, that was beautiful, and thank you. I really appreciate that, because that's kind of why I set up the business in the first place. It was to help people, and you know, help people that didn't quite know where to go. And you know, this is a lovely success story, and the fact that you got back in touch of your own accord and said, you know, I want to give this to other people, was just such a nice thing to do, and such a teacher thing to do. And you know, loads of people have benefited from this tonight, and will continue to benefit from the YouTube recording of it as well. So Lydia, thank you so much for giving up your time. Honestly,
as you can see, the fact that we've run over means I can talk on this subject for a long time. But yeah, anything I can do to help, I'm really happy to do. Please pay it forward to other people, and yeah, I hope you all kind of find the place that you think is the best one for you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Lydia. It's been incredible.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.